Okay, I'll call a meeting to order. I'd like to welcome everyone to the council chambers and to those who are watching from home. I want to begin tonight by offering our congratulations to one of our Freedom of the City recipients, one of the honorees of this community, one of the unofficial mayor of Mayarville, Jean Lambert, is our Freedom of the City recipient. Jean and Suzanne, his wife, celebrated their 70th wedding anniversary. 70th wedding anniversary. My wife and I were able to join them. We're only halfway that distance. Jean Lambert was my scout leader way back when. Yeah, way back when both of us were younger. And on behalf of course, I delivered flowers and greetings on behalf of City Council and their community at that enormously joyous occasion. They're both doing well with lots of family surrounding them. Alors, c'est mon plaisir d'offrir mes félicitations au nom du conseil municipal et au nom du ville de Coquitlam et notre communauté de francophones de Mayarville, Jean et Suzanne Lambert. Congratulations to Jean and Suzanne Lambert for their 70th wedding anniversary. Indeed. Now, I'm sure they're at home watching City Council tonight. Yeah. The second item I'd like to do is some notes that staff have prepared for me related to citizen budget. Tonight I'd take a moment to let residents know about an important feedback opportunity taking place this month. From September 1st to 30th, our online budget survey tool, Citizen Budget, is available at coquitlam.ca/budget. It allows you to complete a mock budget to tell us how you think we should be spending taxpayer dollars. You can have your say from the comfort of your home or office, on a mobile or a desktop device, and it only takes about 8 minutes to complete the survey and offer us some feedback from our citizens. Your feedback does allow us to gain insights about the services you value most and helps us in making our decisions during the upcoming 2018 budget process. So we'd ask people to please be sure to complete it before September 30th so that we can tabulate the results and Council can consider those results during its budget deliberations this fall. We normally complete our budget by the kind of the end of November and then we give it last reading in early December. That's an important process for the City of Coquitlam, and we really do value the opinion of our residents. Thank you very much. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. Our first item this evening is a presentation. I'd like to invite the presentation to come forward, who are here on behalf of the United Way of Lower Mainland, and they're here to update Council on the outcome of the 2016 United Way campaign and 2017 areas of community impact. The delegation is Mr. Chris Siddaway and Ms. Brenda Aynsley.
Thank you very much for having us here today. As Jay introduced us, won't take any more time, but I am the campaign chair for the staff committee, and we wanted to share a brief update on the success of last year's campaign and give an idea as to what we're planning for this year. Also with us here today, Dan is on the committee with us, and I want to acknowledge Dan Mooney and thank him for showing some support for us. And we'll get started. So, we're going to go through an overview, and we're going to talk about last year's campaign, and then we'll get into next year, or this coming campaign, and what we hope that will help us accomplish for next year, and then talk a little bit about how you can help. And we have a couple quick stats there on the side about how some of the dollars that we raise do go into helping the community, and the BC 211 is one of those initiatives that was started by the United Way, and funds such as the ones that we raise here at Coquitlam went towards helping create that and the ongoing support for it. And there's some basic stats on the top 5 calls that come into the Tri-Cities, or from the Tri-Cities. All right, brief overview.
Thanks, and my name is Brenda Aynsley, and I'm the Vice President of Resource Development. And the first thing I'm here to do tonight is to thank Mayor and Council and City staff for your support of this campaign. We really appreciate all the hard work that you do, and you had a fabulous campaign last year. So these are the areas that we work in, and I think that they align very nicely with some of your strategic goals. Moving poverty to possibility links in really closely and nicely to expanding local jobs and prosperity. Your increased active participation and creativity is something that we really focus on, working with kids, allowing them to be all that they can be, and also the work that we do with seniors and their active aging. And strengthening neighborhoods is certainly building strong communities. So we think that there's a really nice link between our two organizations. How do we raise the money? We encourage payroll deduction, and we're really excited this year that there's actually a bit of a strategy to reconnect with some of your retirees. We know that payroll deduction is probably the easiest way to give, and we're very pleased that 85 cents out of every dollar goes directly to direct service in the community. And last year we raised $25.1 million throughout the Lower Mainland.
So last year here in Coquitlam, we focused on 3 strategic areas: building awareness amongst the staff, increasing our amount of donors, and increasing the value of donations. And some of our outputs were that we increased our dollars raised from just shy of $24,000 to over $36,000. And we went from approximately 60 donors to 133 donors last year, so it was 71 new donors. And we had a 44% of previous donors increased their contributions by 15%, which is pretty significant in some cases. So overall, that was an increase of 60 donors. We did lose some donors throughout the year, but we were really happy with the outcome, and look forward to trying to match or increase it on this year.
Thanks, Chris. And so this is just a look at what was raised last year. In the Tri-Cities, $2 million supports 45 organizations, and that's 66 programs and initiatives. And I just want to talk briefly about one particular one. There was a summer program that was that happened at Alderson and Lord Baden-Powell School last summer. And it was for 50 kids aged 6 to 12 who were from the Syrian refugee families that came into the community. And we know that those kids come, and they're, for many reasons, language being just one and the trauma they've suffered, they're often years behind. And starting school in the fall is a really daunting experience. So both of these schools held programs. There was 24 program sessions for 50 of these kids. And it was extremely successful. One little girl, her name was Lena. She was 7 years old, and she was one of her 3 sibs that entered the program. And when she first started the program, and for the first few weeks, she wasn't talking to anyone. She wasn't playing. She was really more than withdrawn, and people were really concerned about how she'd make out. So they provided her a one-to-one tutor. And what they discovered was she was actually pretty smart. She was very curious, but she was just so unsure of herself. So after spending that time with that one-to-one tutoring and mentoring, it really changed the little girl that she was. And by the end of the program, by the end of the summer, she was helping her younger brother and really playing the big sister role and being very comfortable. And for all of these kids, by the time they started school, they not only were comfortable coming to the school, and they knew some of the other kids and the teachers, they actually felt comfortable going out at recess and playing, and they even apparently had some play dates with friends they'd made before. So it was really critical to the success. So that's just one example of what's happening in your community, and I really want to thank you for that. And I want to thank Chris for your leadership, and Dan, and also Chief Pearlotz, and everybody else who supports this behind the scenes. It's really important, and we just want to thank you.
All those little stories that keep us going. So a couple other quick examples. The dollars that we raised here in Coquitlam last year were equivalent to provide some of these types of services to the community, and we just want to give some relevant examples of where that $36,000 could have been applied, and a lot of it would have gone into that school age type programming, as Brenda was talking about. There's a lot of need in that area in the community for sure. So for the 2017 campaign, we are planning on running from September to November with a kickoff this Wednesday at the Works Yard. And we're going to continue to focus on those 3 strategic goals because they worked well for us last year, and we want to continue on that growth that we think we can accomplish. And we're going to keep with the fewer events, not stretch ourselves as a committee too thin. So talking about the Works Yard Barbecue, we're going to continue with impact speakers coming through the different departments to share a little message like the one Brenda just did. And then we're going to finish up with a chili cook-off on the Halloween costume day on October 31st. So tie a couple of events together and make it a little extra fun. And then one of the new things that the United Way discovered was that a number of retirees from other organizations had said that they would like to keep giving, but nobody had ever asked them. So we're going to roll out, with the support of Dan, a retiree campaign this year and contact some of our past donors who have retired and see if they would like to continue. So how can you help us? We recognize that you're out there in the community and you're advocating on behalf of so many different things, and we appreciate that. And we hope that today we left you with some tangible, local examples of how the United Way supports our community, and maybe that will help you in some of those conversations that you do have. And we appreciate your participation in any of our events and in the campaign, and any way that you can help us. We always appreciate that support. And finally, your willingness to encourage the participation of others in the United Way and the campaign and the payroll giving or donation in general is always appreciated. Like I say, you're ambassadors for the community, and we like it when we see you out there supporting the red and white as well. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please pass on our thanks to all of those that volunteer and donate to the United Way in our community and elsewhere, and for the tremendous impact that United Way has on agencies that operate here and on residents of Coquitlam and the Tri-Cities. Thank you. And well done, Chris. Well done, Dan, and all that stuff. How did we get away with not having Dan speak? Yeah, that's good. Okay. Mr. Clerk.
Next item, item 2, is minutes of the public hearing held on Monday, July 31st. Recommendation to approve.
Moved
by Councillor Asmussen, second by Councillor Towner. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 3 is minutes of the regular council meeting held on Monday, July 31st. Recommendation to approve.
Moved by Councillor Towner, second by Councillor O'Neill. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 4 is minutes of the Culture Services Advisory Committee meeting of Thursday, June 15th. Recommendation to receive.
Moved by Chair Councillor Towner, second by Vice Chair Councillor O'Neill. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 5 pertains to zoning amendment bylaw number 4795 to permit development of a 6-story apartment building with 75 dwelling units at 603, 605, and 607 Regan Avenue. This is a project by Marcon Regan West Properties Limited. Staff recommendations: the council give first reading to City of Coquitlam zoning amendment bylaw number 4795. Bylaw number 4795 be referred to public hearing. The council indicates support for the requested variance as set out in attachment 6 to the report, specifically with regard to section 5142 of part 5 general regulations, and that the allowable encroachments for steps and patios be increased from 1.5 meters to 3.1 meters along the west property line, which is Emerson Street. Staff be authorized to prepare a development permit generally in accordance with the attached drawings found in attachment 5. Staff be instructed to complete the following series of items prior to council's consideration of fourth reading should council grant second and third readings to the bylaws, and these are set out in sub-bullets A, B, C, and D to the recommendation.
Moved by Councillor Asmundson, seconded by Councillor, I know, I'm just trying to pick one, Morrison. That's why I picked you. Councillor O'Neill.
Much. I'll be generally supportive of this. I've got a yes or a no, so I guess it has to be all one way or the other. But I have a real question here and a concern with the instructions to staff, 5C. So we are apparently voting to instruct staff to complete the following items, and that's to receive a financial contribution under the city's Community Amenity Act. Well, I think that's rather presumptuous because these financial contributions are entirely voluntary, as we've been told time and time and time again. But perhaps the wording of this indicates staff's actual mindset. Now, and I think council, which voted, those members of council which voted in favor of the Community Amenity Contribution Program did so. One of the reasons was it was voluntary. I think all of council should be concerned about sort of creep settling in here that is, we're gone from thinking it's just voluntary to actually, oh no, well, council is now going to instruct staff to receive those financial contributions. That's a change and significant change in policy, and I wonder if staff was aware of what they've done here and what they're asking council to do, and if they have any response to that.
I would argue that receipt is more passive than extract, and we aren't instructing them to extract the funds. We're asking them to receive them, assuming that they're proffered.
That's an interesting argument, but I'd like to hear what staff has to say.
That would be fine, and I am the chair. Mr. Fuji.
Through the chair to Councillor O'Neill, what we tried to do in the recommendation as in general is to provide sort of an itemized list both for council's consideration, for the applicant, and for the public as a whole in terms of the various things which an applicant needs to complete to finalize their zoning. In this particular case, the applicant has agreed to the contribution, and so, you know, we noted that as just part of it is just as almost and as an accounting sort of thing, so that there is a record that they've agreed to do that. However, you know, should council think about this, the actual policy indicates that that the staff would report back to council at the final adoption stage if an applicant chooses not to contribute CACs. So that's the wording in the actual policy. So, you know, by not including item C, it wouldn't run contrary to the policy and just sort of, how can I describe it? It just, without the reference, unless we advise council otherwise, the applicant has already agreed to the contribution. So, you know, if council finds this maybe a bit too aggressive, this item, you know, it could be removed, and we could in the future only make a notation regarding the CACs if an applicant has chosen for whatever reason not to contribute, which is what the actual policy refers to.
Well, I would be more comfortable with that because you said that was the policy that council agreed to. Earlier you said that these A, B, C, D, E are the things that the applicant needs to complete to finalize the zoning. Let's be clear here. There is no connection between receipt of a community amenity contribution and whether or not we agree to rezone something. That's been said many, many times. And we cannot hold this over anybody's head. We cannot withhold zoning if they refuse to pay the CACs. That would be, I would think, quite improper and maybe have legal consequences. So I would be much happier to take this right out and just to follow the policy and to report to council at the end of the process if, at fourth reading, as you said, if the if the applicant has agreed to pay the CACs or not. And then council can make its final vote with that in mind. I think that's a policy, and I think that's what should be done. I think having something like C in here subverts the policy. Removing C.
The motion is to remove C from recommendation 5. It's an amendment. We'll start a new queue. Are there any speakers to the amendment? Councillor Hodge.
Question. Without being able to flip through some of the past ones, is this not just the standard wording? I thought that's... Is in most of our applications when they come forward, is this not just a procedural thing, the receipt of financial contributions under the amenity contribution? I thought this is just, seems to me I've seen this wording before.
Mr. Fuji.
Through the chair to Councillor.
Sorry. I guess the question was raised because you used the word creep, which implies that it had changed over time. First time you noticed it, so it may well not have changed. Got it. Mr. Fuji.
Sorry, through the chair to Councillor Hodge. I can't tell you that we've done it consistently, but there have been a few reports in the past where recommendation along this line has been in there. We try to pick it up under the financial implication section of the report, and that, like I say, it does help both the staff and the applicant in terms of, the things to do, so there's no confusion. But without that particular clause, staff would ensure that if there is a voluntary, if the applicant has voluntarily agreed to contribute those contributions, we'll make sure that they're done. And as I indicated earlier, if for whatever reason an applicant chooses not to, we would clearly report back to council. We haven't had a situation like that to date, though.
So I guess my question is, this is in here more, it's a timing in terms of the overall process, and it's just one more as they're going through their whole list of what they have to do. This is when they make the payment. So I appreciate Councillor O'Neill's concern because the way it sounds like it is an official requirement, but it's more, I think, in there because this is at the time at which you do it. And I've seen this before, so I don't think that this is considered creep. But there may be a different way to word this or to achieve the same thing, which is indicating when the timing is due. And if somebody chose not to make it, then I think that's the time at which it would get reported out.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm having trouble with, I guess the only word I raised my back, the hair on my back, was the word creep, because I'm not certain it has changed either, but I understand where you're coming from, and now I'll go to Councillor Wilson.
Thanks. I actually had the exact same concern as Councillor O'Neill, and I asked Councillor Marsden about that, and he said, well, maybe they've already volunteered to pay it. And I hadn't thought about that, and so in effect, that's what they've done. So we can take it out of item C, or maybe in the financial implications, we just say approximately $176,000 in the form of voluntary community amenity contributions, or in the form of community amenity contributions which they have volunteered to pay. If in the report it had said that they had already volunteered to pay, then it may not have been as much of an issue as it is because it's missing. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Marsden, the anonymous one.
Thank you. Councillor O'Neill and I disagree on the policy of CACs, but we are in 100% agreement on this piece. In terms of presentation, I think it would be appropriate to put it in the financial implications you've done, but make it clear that the proponent has volunteered to pay this amount, so the wording would be there. The troubling part on this, to me, is that with it included as C, it basically says that we are instructing staff not to bring it forward for consideration unless they pay it. Whereas I think it's important that you would still bring this forward if they've agreed to pay it, and then at some point in time they change their mind or whatever, it's still going to come forward for fourth, but you'd be reporting back to us that they hadn't. So again, I think from a go-forward perspective, I'd prefer that we not include that item C on any of the reports, but in the financial implications, we make it very clear that they have voluntarily agreed to it, and I think that covers all the bases for us. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
I agree with Councillor Marsden, but where it says receipt of financial contributions, it could be comma, if any, under the community amenity contribution, because there could be some and there could be not. You know, some people look at this as not a good thing to do, but when you're redoing a whole city that we need so much there, and as they're building these beautiful buildings, we also need new parks and new other amenities in that neighborhood, which helps them with the marketing of their buildings and all kinds of things. So it may be voluntary by some builders, and this happens to be a very good builder, and some may feel that they don't want to volunteer, and staff would advise us one way or the other. So as far as I'm concerned, if it says if any, and I'd be quite happy with that. Thank you.
Councillor Asmundson.
Well, thank you. I support Councillor Neal. We both had the same feeling about CACs, and it's simply because there's no legislation governing it, and we get into these situations here, and it shouldn't be within a requirement. It should be within the financial statement. But even still, my concerns relate back to if the CAC wasn't agreed to as a financial, would this report be before council? Would staff still, if they said, no, we don't want it, would you still bring it forward, or would staff find a reason that there's some variances in here that they would hold it up?
Through the chair,
Mr. Fuji.
Councillor Asmussen, no, we would bring it forward, and thank you for council for, I guess, clarifying, particularly for myself and the planning department in terms of the more clarity on this. So it helps us a lot. We'll ensure that the wording in the financial implication section, that where we're like I say, 99% of the applicants, or at least all the ones we've dealt with so far, have voluntarily agreed to provide the contribution. So we will ensure to include the word that they volunteered, or it's voluntary, in the financial implication section. And in the unlikely event that there's some dispute, we would still bring it forward to council for its consideration for final.
I hope that when we're dealing with the development community that we will let them know up front, if you don't pay the fee, that we will still bring the report forward. But I do think from the reports I've seen all the time now, it's been in the financial, we've had sometimes a range of a number of what the CAC, because there's more final detail to come in the final version, the final report, fourth and final. So that's where it really should belong. That's where I've seen most of it. We've given a range of what the funding, here it just says, and it's making it a requirement, which I thank Councillor Neal for pointing that out. I'll support the amendment.
Yep. I had a similar comment to Councillor Reid's. I added the word any to just before financial contributions, receipt of any, although I do think it's unneeded, because I'm not certain that any of our staff would turn down a contribution received from a proponent to our community amenity charge, and I want to make it publicly available to all of our residents that if you do want to make a contribution to our community amenity fund, please, staff will accept those with or without a council resolution to that regard. And now we have an amendment on the floor to delete 5C. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? That motion carries. The amended motion is the remaining staff recommendations. We'll go back to QA, and we're on Councillor O'Neill still. Nothing more. Councillor Hodge.
Yes, thank you. Mine is on D, registration restricted covenant to require electric vehicle charging ports says that for a minimum of 12 parking spaces and conduit for the remaining. I just think that, and I'm glad to see this in here. I think this is the first we've seen, but I think this is a direction that council has said they'd like to go. Certainly, I think that we're going to see more and more electric vehicles. And I'm happy to see that, but I now wonder if at this point that we just shouldn't put in more than just the 12. I mean, and pre-wire for them, because I think by the time this building is built, there's going to be a lot more electric vehicles, and certainly will be during the lifetime of this vehicle or this building.
I'll speak to this because I was the one who supported
Mr. Stepper.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson's suggestion that we consider such a thing, and the wording at that time was 20%, and I believe this is following that resolution, and this should be seen as a very good news story because this is the first time we have done it, and it is following just a very recent discussion with council in this regard.
Yeah, and as I said, I'm very pleased to see this come forward. I forgot about the 20%, but I think by the time we get this, the policy, even that, we may want to up that quickly. I note that with the mayor's recent car, which he's talked about, and I'm just getting one now, so we're already pretty much at our 20% just on this council. So I think that if that's going to be indicative of, well, 2 out of 10, it's, we're getting, I think this is going to quickly become the norm out there. So I'm happy that Councillor Wilson raised this. I'm happy that we're doing this. And I just think that this is going to become the wave of the future. So I'm certainly happy with where we are. But I just want to put it out there that I think that as we move forward, we may even want to look at more, and it may be in the best interest of the developer himself to look at more. So, but that was more to mention more, as I'm pleased to see that go forward. The one that I did have a question on is the next bullet, which is the minimum of adaptable units. And I see that in this building, it's a minimum of 8 adaptable units. Now what I'm wondering is, relaying that back to the parking restrictions, which we have a number of small parking spots. I think it's 11%. And I'm just wondering if there is any way to tie larger parking spaces with parking spaces more conveniently located to those adaptable units. Because one of the things that I've heard is that when units are sold, the parking spot is sold with the unit, and then somebody moves in 5 years from now that may need an accessible parking spot, and that may not necessarily be the one tied to that unit. In fact, it could be one of the 11% small units, and it may make sense that while we're moving towards adaptable units, we should be matching those units with parking spots that are also suited for people that have mobility issues.
Mr. Fuji.
So through the chair to Councillor Hodge, we will have a further discussion with the applicant with that regards, and we'll report back in public hearing brief when the application in terms of what arrangements we can make regards to your request.
Okay, good. Those are my 2 comments on parking. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
I was going to reiterate what Councillor Hodge just mentioned.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, Councillor Marsden, what's next in the queue?
I see that, yes. And you were going to reiterate it, but you won't anymore. Okay. Councillor Marsden.
Thank you. Just on the clarification and on the electric vehicles, it says 12, a minimum of 12, which our city manager said the direction was kind of 20%. But we've got 75 units, so 20% would be 15. So how do we come up with the number 12? If perhaps we can just get clarification on that. I appreciate we don't have a hard, firm policy on it yet. Happy to see it. I agree with everybody around the table. Happy to see it there. Just for public hearing, if we could get clarification around that, I would appreciate it.
Mr. Fuji?
We'll provide, through the chair to Councillor Marsden, we'll provide more clarification in the public hearing brief, but as this being the first application being brought forward to council where the direction regarding EV parking came up, so it was through a negotiation discussion with the applicant. Again, we can have a further conversation with them prior to the public hearing whether or not we can push it a bit further to get to the 20% as per the, shall we call it the interim direction? So.
Well, at this point in time, I mean, if there's been a dialogue back and forth, we don't have a hard, firm rule on it yet. So if there's been dialogue where they're voluntarily coming up with 12, I think that's a good step in that direction. But again, it's just a clarification for the public hearing. The other question I have relates to the remaining properties on the street, because the street is seen, looks like some fairly new homes on it as well. This parcel together can, in terms of presenting us for public hearing, confirm that the remaining parcel of land that's available wouldn't wind up being orphaned. We're hearing a lot of comments of late of people concerned about being that last house on the street and not having any development opportunity. So if staff on this sort of thing, when they bring it forward, they can confirm that there's sufficient properties remaining on the street that do have development opportunity down the road, that they're not left out and orphaned. Okay.
I don't think there's any orphans left in this one, is there?
No, I don't believe there is. And looking at the photo, I just want to clarify that I'm reading the overview map correctly. And again, as we go forward, we're just keeping that in mind, because again, we've heard that as we went through Coquitlam Lougheed neighborhood plan, some residents concerned about it. And again, recently we had a concern with a resident that feeling that their property might be left out and what would happen. So I think it's important that we address that type of thing. And be clear about it. So thank you very much.
Okay, and what Councillor Marsden is referring to is the city has a policy of trying to avoid what's called an orphan, that is a leftover piece that can't be developed to the density of the lands around it because it's too small. There are occasionally landowners that simply will not sell, and that means that they're entitled to not sell, but the intent is not to leave a single-family home completely surrounded by high-rises like in the animated movie Up. The goal, obviously, is to try to have the redevelopment of a neighborhood proceed somewhat efficiently, such that all of the land uses around a particular neighborhood are similar in density, and an orphan makes that difficult. We try to avoid that. We can't force it, but we do try to avoid it. Councillor Wilson, you said no? Okay. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. I have 3 questions, or 3 comments. I don't like the mix of apartments. I would rather have seen more 3 bedrooms, but that's just because we need to accommodate more families. But it is what it is. At least we've got some. I was wondering where the 3 bedrooms were located, and I seem to see by going through that there's a couple on each floor. There's 2 on some floors, 3 on the others, so I get that. My biggest quandary is this, and I'm on, I don't know where I am. I'm on L1-0, which is an outside drawing of Emerson and Regan Avenue. I'm quite concerned about the development variance. So I don't know if visually either of you, Mr. Fuji or Mr. McIntosh, are familiar with the apartment building right on the corner of Clark and Emerson, I believe. No, it would be Como and Emerson. And it seems to be quite close to the sidewalk. So was there a variance on that as well? I can't remember, so I'm asking. You probably can't remember either. Okay, this is a really tight area, and when you drive through there, we have 6 stories, we have 4 stories, we have townhouses. It's a real mix of housing choices, which is good. But I'm looking at the L1-0, and on Emerson Street, you have something in yellow. What is the yellow? You have 2 yellow parts, and is the one yellow the sidewalk, or is it part of the, I'm trying to visualize the way you've got stairs and patios, and I'm not successful at it. So ground floor, I'm sorry, L1.0. Yep. So where my concern is this, Emerson is going to be a very busy little street, simply because we'll have the YWCA along that street at the end. It's a back entrance into Coquitlam Square. It's got lots of stuff going on it. So what I want to know is the little yellow strip. So will there be, how much space between the end of the private patio to the sidewalk? Maybe that's an easier way of asking. There's supposed to be 5 feet. No, they're supposed to be 10 and they want 5. Is that correct? That's right.
So, just for clarification, through the chair to Councillor Reid, under the zoning bylaw, there is an allowance made for small little projections in the required yards, and so what the bylaw says is you can, beyond the building face, you can encroach a maximum of 5 feet. Right. In this particular case, the applicant is proposing to go
10 feet.
A little bit further. And the principal reason is that there is a grade change between Emerson and the building face. And part of the design rationale is through addressing the grade change is to better screen the parkade. So rather than having one tall wall with a bit of landscaping, the applicant is proposing to do a terrace stepping with landscaping on the 2 terraces.
So if I lived in the very ground floor, yep, would I have a patio on the ground, or would I be up a bit? And then
the way the drawings are structured, the owners of a ground floor suite would have access to 2 levels of usable open space or usable patios, which are the units which front onto Emerson.
Okay, so they both. So would the ground floor on Emerson and the ground floor patio touch the sidewalk? No.
Through the chair, if I could, to Councillor Reid.
It's difficult to feature, yeah.
Yeah, I realize that. We appreciate that. And first, as the yellow strip, I think that's just the color copying comes through as yellow. That's actually, it's a grass boulevard along that side of Emerson. And so there's a nice grass boulevard. There's the sidewalk. And as George described, it's a clever way of essentially camouflaging the parkade that comes out. And so you have a vertical rise.
I get that.
And we've seen that some of the tours where we've gone downtown. We've seen, the units are quite close to the street. So you use the vertical to help offset. But the point about Emerson and the street wall that's being created along there in the woods, I think is a really, it's an interesting question. So let us take that away. We'll come up with that, because I agree. The nature of Emerson is going to change incredibly.
It's just a tunnel going through there.
Yes, let's see how that works. Absolutely, because across on the west side of Emerson, there's the new Boza Towers. There's some townhouses there. There's these developments, which are very handsome. But it's a very much changed streetscape.
What, a 30-story tower right across the street. Yeah. So thank you. But I'm wondering, when you come back, if you could have a drawing that's a little better for the general public when they come to public hearing, because this looks like really a big difference when you go from 5 feet to 10 feet. So let's have an explanation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Towner.
Thank you. I just want to say I'm happy to move this along to public hearing. I think it looks like a well thought out property development. But I also just want to reiterate what Councillor Reid said. I circled the unit mix as well. And if possible, I would like to see more 3-bedroom units, if that'll work, just because more families are moving into the area. And 3 bedrooms is really only a couple and 2 kids. I would be happy to see that mix change a little bit if possible.
Thank you. I've got 2 comments. One is related to the 220 volt outlets for the 12 parking spaces. We're putting in conduit to all the parking spaces Full disclosure, I just took possession of my new electric car. It charges on a regular 110 household. It can charge on a 220, about twice as fast. And so I think that, and I agree with those that say that certainly within the lifetime of these buildings, but I suspect within the lifetime of the marketing of these buildings, we're going to have more than 12 people in here that are contemplating electric vehicles. So I'm going to suggest that this may well be one of the last buildings we accept that doesn't have at least a 110 duplex outlet at every parking space, if not for charging the car, but also for the vacuuming and the various things that people do. And I don't know that 220 will be a requirement, because you can always pull a thicker wire through to satisfy it, or even wire it for 240 if you want, 220 if you want, but use a duplex. So that said, so I'm leaning toward in future, I'm fine with this application, but leaning toward in future simply requiring a 110 everywhere, and seeing where the industry ends up going. On the unit size, I've mentioned a few times, and I'm going to mention it again at the risk of being repetitive. I want us to start forgiving the third bedroom on some of these projects. We could easily change the unit count here. It's harder on a 6-story wood frame because we're boxed in by setbacks, but certainly on high-rise product where the unit count for each, the number of bedrooms rather in each unit is determined by FSR. It's determined by, can I get more money by creating 2 1-bedroom units, or rather 3 1-bedroom units, or 2 or 3-bedroom units? And I suspect I get more revenue from the 1-bedroom units, and therefore we've put in place an inadvertent market cue to tell developers to build smaller units, because we establish density not units per acre, but on square feet per acre, square feet per hectare. And if we convert to a unit count instead, or at the very least start forgiving the third bedroom, we'll end up with a whole bunch more at no cost to us and very little cost to the market, because they're not paying for that density. If we require it here, they're paying $120 a foot or something just for the density. So the extra bedroom costs them the construction cost plus 120. We can lower that cost and therefore increase the availability of family units. Our challenge right now, of course, is we can't expect families to get into single family anymore, and we can't build enough townhouse. So there's going to be some families that end up in 3-bedroom or look desperately for 3-bedroom apartments, and these buildings are almost ideal for that, in that they're close to a park, they're close to transit, and we're not going to have enough 3 bedrooms because we're punishing them on the square footage basis. Again, not as relevant on a wood frame. So I've said it before, I'll encourage one more time, and probably many more times, that we figure out how to remove that market disincentive to the 3rd bedroom. Seeing no, Councillor Reid.
Just want to clarify something on the parking for the handicap units. Usually the strata owns, it's all common property, and the strata owns it, and the strata allocates. So the strata would allocate a handicap space for a handicap unit usually. And then if that person sells or moves on, the strata still has the ability to shuffle them around. So thought I'd bring that up. Thank you.
In many cases, the handicapped unit or the accessible unit is accessible for the purposes of a child in a wheelchair, and therefore sometimes it's not a wheelchair space that they need. So yeah. So delinking them, yeah, exactly. Any further comment? Okay, the question is, as amended, the staff recommendation.
As amended, and we'll renumber it if to A, B, and C.
As amended and renumbered, relettered on recommendation 5. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. We're going for public hearing.
Item number 6 pertains to Heritage Revitalization Agreement Bylaw number 4798 and Heritage Designation Bylaw number 4799. These bylaws facilitate the restoration and retention of an existing heritage house and permit a 2-lot subdivision at 207 Allard Street. Staff recommendations that Council give first reading to City of Coquitlam Heritage Revitalization Agreement Authorization Bylaw number 4798. First reading to City of Coquitlam Heritage Designation Bylaw number 4799. That bylaws number 4798 and 4799 be referred to public hearing. And that staff be instructed to complete the following items prior to Council's consideration of fourth reading, should Council grant second and third readings to the above bylaws as set out in bullets numbered A, B, and C.
Moved by Councillor Towner, second by Councillor Asmussen. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 7 pertains to the draft New Westminster Official Community Plan. Staff recommendations that Council express concerns to New Westminster regarding the potential future transportation impacts associated with the Sapperton Green transit-oriented mixed-use community. And 2, that staff be directed to forward a copy of this report to New Westminster as Coquitlam's formal submission on the draft OCP.
Moved by Councillor Asmussen, second by Councillor Marsden. Councillor Reid.
On them, where we express concerns to New West regarding, so number 1. Mine is to do with the crane site. And when we had some years ago an opportunity to develop it, it was almost unwieldy to have an access egress off East Columbia Street. And it would have been very unwieldy for the City of New Westminster because that is a main corridor for them coming in from North Road. I'm concerned that because without any extra access and egress for cars, then that is going to put this particular building site at risk of having to use the East Columbia Street. And that concerns me simply because it's an access to a hospital. So at one time we did have sort of an agreement in principle of having the backdoor access, which would be through the Sapperton Green. And I hope we can come to some agreement over that again because it benefits both of us. One, by not trapping all the cars in front of the only road to Royal Columbian. And I think that's necessary both for emergency vehicles and for emergencies on the crane site trying to get emergency vehicles in and out. So those would be my concerns regarding the OCP. Other than that, it's lovely. Thank you.
There you go. No other speakers? Staff recommendation. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 8 pertains to fourth and final reading of zoning amendment bylaw number 4686 and the property at 1414 Haversley Avenue. Staff recommendations that Council give fourth and final reading to City of Coquitlam zoning amendment bylaw number 4686.
Moved by Councillor O'Neill, second by Councillor Morrison. Councillor Reid.
Just through to Mr. McIntyre on this one. This is the same area where we had the folks, the neighbors complaining that we had given approval for final on another site down the street, and it's just been sitting there becoming a big giant blackberry bush. Do we know if we have any building plans forthcoming on this? Or are we giving fourth reading and it can just sit there again? That wouldn't be too fair to the neighborhood to have two sites like that.
Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, thanks, Your Worship. And through the chair to Councillor Reid. Don't know precisely where they're at with their building permit application. We can check on that and get back to council. I do recall, though, there had been a fair bit of work done on that, because if earlier in the process at the public hearing, I think the applicant had taken some some great pains and coming up with some house designs that would work on those lots in that neighborhood.
I know all that.
So I would trust that it's proceeding forward. They may want to get the rezoning completed, the subdivision done, and then sell the lots. And I think there would be the building designs that would be attached to those lots to make sure that who eventually would buy them would build something consistent with the plans that were shown.
I understood the applicant at that time was going to live in one and sell the other one.
But if
I want the people on Haversley Street to have two sites that were already zoned and nobody building on them.
Fair question. Let us check, and we can update council on that. I'm curious now that you've raised the question myself.
Thank you.
Thank you. Question is fourth and final reading on Haversley. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 9 pertains to the Metro Vancouver Board and Brief for its meeting of July 28th. Our Metro Vancouver Board representatives are available to respond to questions and the staff recommendations that Council received for information in the Metro Vancouver Board and Brief.
Moved by Councillor Marsden, second by Councillor O'Neill. I want to point out an interesting turn of events for Councillor O'Neill, actually, as he is a perennial student of the English language. At the top of page 3, we have changed illegal dumping. Illegal dumping is not dumping anymore. It is abandoned waste. Orphaned waste, yes.
Orphaned?
No, it's abandoned waste, as though it has passively found itself on the side of the street and someone walked away from it. Receipt, all in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Your Worship, that's the last formal item on this agenda.
Adjournment has been moved by Councillor O'Neill, seconded by Councillor Marsden. All in favor? All opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We will now open the floor to questions from the public on any items on today's agenda. Any questions on today's agenda? Any questions at all? Last chance. Thank you all for coming. Have a good evening.